Welcome to the 9th Annual Leveraged Finance Fights Melanoma event. Our program will begin shortly. Welcome to the 9th Annual Leveraged Finance Fights Melanoma. Thank you to our generous sponsors for making this program possible. While access to this program is offered free to all viewers, melanoma research needs your support. If you feel moved to donate individually, please click on the donate button above. 100% of your tax-deductible donation to MRA will go directly to support melanoma research. Thank you and enjoy the program.
Welcome to 2020's Leverage Finance Fights Melanoma virtual event.
We of course wish we could be doing this in person, but we are so happy that you're able to join us remotely and celebrate the amazing progress we have seen since this event started in 2012. At the very first LFFM, I said that in our day jobs, we are not exactly curing cancer, but our professions allow us the privilege of helping those who do. And I do want to thank all of you who have done exactly that over these years. A lot has happened over these years in cancer research, including LFFM doing direct investing of over $13 million in cutting edge research that's had a huge impact on the lives of those battling melanoma and many other kinds of cancer. Although Brendan, Dylan, and I started this event, we definitely get too much credit for it. We have 7 other fantastic co-chairs and 28 steering committee members, along with so many individuals among our sponsors who really make this happen. And it really is a tremendous team effort.
The Leverage Finance community is incredible. Thank you to the Leverage Finance community for all of your support over the years. And we look forward to seeing you again in the spring.
Good evening. My name is Ian Schumann. I'm one of the co-chairs of this evening's Leverage Finance Fights Melanoma event. I want to thank everybody for their continued support of LFFM, although it's not as much fun this year as in previous when we all can get together for a fun event. This is very important for MRA and frankly very important for me personally. As a capital markets attorney in New York, I've known of LFFM for years. I've worked alongside many of you on various different types of transactions, but my personal journey with melanoma began almost 2 years to the day when I was diagnosed with stage 4 melanoma. The scans and tests at that time had revealed that the cancer had spread to almost every major organ in my body. It was on my liver, it was on my lungs, it was in my brain, it was on my spine. And I knew enough about the disease, like all of you, to know that melanoma is scary. It is super aggressive, and for those who are diagnosed in late stages, the prognosis is generally not very good. In those few days that followed my initial diagnosis, I had pretty much accepted the fact that I was going to die. The first inkling, the first ray of hope I received was when I sat down with my oncologist at the time, for the first time, Dr. Jeffrey Weber at NYU, and he said those words to me that although he acknowledged that I had an exceedingly high disease burden in my body, he said, hey, we could treat this. I remember sort of being incredulous at the time, like, what do you mean we could treat this? And he went on to explain all the developments that we've made in immunotherapies and checkpoint inhibitors for treating melanoma, in particular late stage melanoma. And he told me that we're not just going to try to prolong your life by a few months, we're actually going to try to beat this. And considering where I was coming from just a day prior, the notion that I actually had a shot or had some hope of beating this, well, I was thrilled. I remember saying to Dr. Weber, well, gosh, I feel pretty good about this. He's like, well, I don't know if you should feel good, but you should feel better. And I remember getting to that first treatment, and it was a Friday, early October, I think. The following Tuesday, Dr. Allison and Dr. Hanjo won the Nobel Prize for the very drugs that were being put in my body to combat melanoma. You fast forward 2 years now, I'm about to get my scans, my 2-year scans, to see where we are, and the disease has regressed enough that we're not even sure there's any more cancer left in my body. So I'm still very much in this fight. So how do we get from what was effectively a death sentence not too long ago to this, to myself sitting here talking to you? I've had, obviously, taken a considerable amount of time getting to understand the science, meeting the scientists, meeting the doctors who are working on new innovations in combating melanoma and various types of related cancers. And the one thing I can tell you is these people have amazing imaginations and work ethic and grit. And they're amazing. But how do we get to here? From was effectively a death sentence to me sitting in front of you tonight? Well, the answer is you. I'm alive because of you. I'm alive because of Michael Milken. I'm alive because of Deborah and Leon Black. I'm alive because of MRA. And I'm alive because of the sponsors of LFFM. The money, the funds, the resources generated through this event and by MRA has directly funded the science that saved my life. You allowed this to happen. And I asked my co-chairs for an opportunity just to thank all of you for saving my life. There's a tremendous amount to do. The drugs we have today, the immunotherapies that we have today still don't work for everybody. Too many people don't respond effectively to these treatments. Too many people are still dying. The side effects from some of these treatments are still too severe, such that too many people are still falling off the protocol. The diagnostic equipment, the diagnostic technologies we have can always be improved so that we can recognize, identify cancers earlier and treat them more effectively. But this is where you all come in. This is what you guys are best at. You are designed, hardwired to identify where's the greatest rate of return. And this is it. I promise you, and I am living proof, that if you fund these scientists, you help MRA, you fund these doctors, they are going to win. They are going to not only eventually beat melanoma, they're going to take the same technology that we learn and we are learning from treating melanoma to combat other types of cancers and then combat other types of diseases. This is where it started. And so I would really like to take this opportunity to thank all of you. It's very difficult to thank someone for saving your life. What do you say? Thank you.
Thank you for joining the 9th annual Leverage Finance Fights Melanoma event.
When we started, it was a relatively small group of people gathering within the leverage finance community to support this cause. And as it's grown, so has its reach. And I think you're going to hear a lot of very exciting things about both what's been going on and the work that's been done and what's yet to come.
I'd like to thank our presenting sponsors, Kirkland & Ellis, Latham & Watkins, Simpson Thatcher, and Veritas Capital.
And our platinum sponsors, Apollo, Cahill Gordon and Rindell, Fitch Ratings, Iron Park Capital, HPS Investment Partners, UBS Financial Services. Thank you so much and enjoy the presentation.
Good afternoon, and thank you so much for joining us today. A little over 13 years ago, my wife Deborah was diagnosed with acral melanoma. At that time, as we started to do the research, we were shocked to learn not only how serious melanoma can be, but also how few options there were for treating it. Back then, only 2 FDA-approved treatments existed for melanoma. Patients with late-stage disease had less than a 10% chance of surviving 5 years out. As we talked about Deborah's melanoma diagnosis with our dear friend Mike Milken, Mike challenged us to make a difference and establish an effort to directly fund and accelerate melanoma research. Having lost his own father to melanoma, Mike was there to help us. And together we launched the Melanoma Research Alliance in 2007 to accelerate research and end pain and suffering due to melanoma. From the start, we knew we could not do this alone. And to facilitate that, my family committed to covering all operational expenses at the MRA so that 100% of donor funds, like those raised through Leverage Finance Fights Melanoma, go directly to research, without deductions or other expenses. That commitment continues to this day. 9 years ago, after Jeff Rowbottom and Brendan Dillon both confronted melanoma in their own lives, they decided they needed to get more involved to help fund the fight, and together they launched the Leverage Finance Fights Melanoma events. To date, LFFM events have raised over $13 million to advance melanoma research. Funds from LFFM account for more than 10% of the $123 million MRA has invested in research to date. Research funded at over 150 different institutions around the globe in 18 different countries. And the outcomes of that funded research are truly impressive. Since the time Deborah was diagnosed with melanoma, when only 2 FDA-approved treatments existed, we've added 13 new FDA-approved treatments. In fact, where melanoma was once considered a dead end for research, it has become the poster child for innovation in treating cancer. Just last year, the American Cancer Society reported the single largest drop in cancer mortality ever reported, with melanoma leading the way in not only bringing down the overall cancer death rate, but checkpoint immunotherapy treatments first discovered in melanoma, now used to impact more than 20 other types of cancer. Funds raised through LFFM have helped make this possible. Thank you all so much. While the progress made in melanoma over the past 10 years is encouraging and has redefined the oncology field, we still have a long way to go. The 5-year survival that once was less than 10% now exceeds 50% on some of the latest treatments. Today, there are more people living with melanoma and thriving than ever before. But that also means that 50% of patients with advanced melanoma do not respond to even the latest treatments, accounting for nearly 8,000 deaths this year alone. There is still work to do. It is within that context that I want to extend my sincere thanks to the finance community. Melanoma is personal to me. It is not only a challenge that Deborah and I faced together, but has also taken the life of my sister Judy 4 years ago. We will not stop our efforts with MRA until we end suffering and death due to melanoma. With that in mind, I want to thank the LFFM co-chairs. And of course, our gratitude to Mike Milken, who helped us launch MRA from the start. I am so thrilled to hand the program off to Mike now for the 9th annual Leverage Finance Fights Melanoma. Thank you.
I want to thank you for joining us at the MRA with Leverage Finance today. This is a very personal issue for me. My family has been funding melanoma research for almost 50 years. And I remember vividly the days that I visited with the doctors and the scientists and the clinicians in the 70s before my father lost his life to melanoma. And very little happened over a very long period of time, almost 30 years, until the Melanoma Research Alliance was formed. And melanoma and other cancers and the outcome for patients has changed dramatically with your support. The work that started in immunology in the mid-1990s with Jim Allison, who won the Nobel Prize for his work, the most effective treatment that had ever come to melanoma at that time. And your support for the Melanoma Research Alliance has resulted in more than 13 drugs now being approved by the FDA. And so with skin cancer being the most diagnosed cancer in this country, there is now hope for everyone who is diagnosed with melanoma because of your support of the MRA. Today, we have the honor of having David Feinberg, the head of Google Health, and my boss, and I refer to her by her first name, Esther, who runs Faster Cures, join us in stepping back and looking at what has happened in COVID-19 and the fact that the Melanoma Research Alliance work is proving to be maybe another hope for COVID-19 patients. So I talked to David in February, arrived in his office in March, and told him that Google had an essential role to play in dealing with this pandemic that was being unleashed on our planet. David, why don't you bring us back maybe from that day to what has been Google's response at all levels to this COVID-19 pandemic?
It's really great to be with you and Esther. Not only our friendship, but as a melanoma survivor myself, this has particular importance to me. So I thank you and the organization for giving all of us hope, which I think is so important. Happy to bring you up to speed on what we're doing at Google and Alphabet in general to try to do our part around COVID-19. I think the first thing that we did, and I'm very proud of how the teams worked on this, is to make sure that we got authoritative information out. So when you came to Google search, that you were seeing information that made sense to you from a local standpoint, from a regional standpoint, and from an international standpoint. You know, Google for the first time, took over the web page for a medical condition. We've never done that before. We've only done that for natural disasters like floods and hurricanes. We call it an SOS page. So if you typed in anything in a search bar around COVID, coronavirus, etc., you got to a landing page on Google that was completely curated, that we made sure that there were all authoritative information, that it made sense based on what region you were in, no advertisements, so that we could make sure people were getting the same type of information. Similar on YouTube, making sure on YouTube that we raise the authoritative information because it's a community network there. We have the ability to remove what we would consider non-authoritative information and really get people the information they're looking for. And we really saw two groups of people. You know, we saw consumers or regular folks coming, but we saw also a lot of clinicians coming to YouTube and Google. You know, how do you treat this? What are they doing in China? What's happening in Italy, et cetera? So really thought about those two audiences and how we could best get them that important information in a really timely manner. The next big thing that I'm proud of that we released were our community mobility reports. These are now used in 130 countries worldwide daily. And this was really public health folks coming to us and asking them to solve a problem for them. And the problem was, are people social distancing? Are people staying away from crowded areas? Are people using transport that's crowded? Are they going to shopping centers? Are they staying at home? And these reports, in a very privacy-first way, allow public health authorities in an anonymized way to see, are the policies around social distancing actually taking hold, and are they actually working? And you could actually then predict where folks were doing well and what would happen. Following that, and this was in partnership with Apple, we released exposure notifications. And this was, again, public health experts asking us to help with contact tracing. So think about it. If you're positive, you just got your test today and you're positive COVID, you would know that you've been in contact maybe with a few family members, and maybe if you went to work with a couple work people. But if you were on the bus or you were in a crowded area, there'd be no way to contact those other people that you may have exposed. So in this voluntary system, and it works both on the Android phone and the Apple phone, people can volunteer to be part of it, such that if they came into exposure with somebody that is now COVID positive, they would get a notification that they've had, in essence, 15 minutes of contact in under 6 feet distance with somebody who's now positive. Again, we don't keep any of the medical information. You don't actually know the person you were exposed to. You just get a notification that you were exposed. We already have this now in 4 states, more coming on, and now 16 countries and different regions, including Germany, Japan, Italy, Brazil, are using our tool. We think of it as an important piece of the overall tool. And then most recently, really excited about this, we released what we call Search Trends Symptom Data Set. And that's basically, how many people in certain geographies, think of a county, are searching for something like, I'm having trouble smelling, or my toes hurt, or I have a fever, or I'm coughing. And if those levels of search change, can that information, can that data, again, in a privacy protecting way, be used by researchers to better predict where the next COVID outbreak is coming? So what we've really tried to do in general is get information out there, both to the public, to researchers, to public health folks, so they can make better decisions about what's happening and what they need to change so that we can all get through this.
David, one of the things we'll get back to in a few minutes is talking about how this COVID-19 pandemic might change the future, accelerate technology. As we know, many parts of the U.S. alone have had 100 to 1,000-fold increase in telemedicine visits and interactions. And I want to comment on another element here that is exceedingly important for our viewers and listeners, David, and that is something we saw back 30 years ago, is the clinicians themselves coming. So we have people giving advice to patients, doctors, clinicians all over the world. And by providing them a source they can go to with current updated information, they then themselves can provide better information as they interact with patients. And at one time in some of our early medical research groups, we saw 20, 30 years ago, in some cases, in more technical information, 50% of the people that came were doctors. And this is exceedingly important on how to get the information, particularly out to family practitioners, David. And I just want to commend you for that. So Esther had a big job. I called her up in February and told her that she is ground zero for the world, her and her team at Faster Cures, on making sure we're monitoring what is going on treating COVID, both vaccines, antibodies, antivirals, at all. But not only that, we needed to give people a list of what was going on. And I told her initially that we should be prepared to update this list once a week. She then told me, thank you, we're going to update it every night with her team. So I told her that might be too much work, but she's managed to do that. And Esther, as the center of providing this information to the world, our interaction with the foundations such as Gates, NIH, and the BARDA and the HHS and FDA and so on. Why don't you take us through what has occurred over the 6 months quickly, and where are we today and where are we going?
Well, thank you so much, Mike. And it is great to be with the Melanoma Research Alliance audience and participants. And Mike, you're right. Back in February, when we had that conversation, we put together a spreadsheet, a back of the envelope spreadsheet that has now turned into this incredible tool that's had billions of views. I mean, it's been actually quite humbling just to see the level of uptake across researchers and governments and so forth. So in early February, March, there are maybe 2 or 3 dozen compounds that were actually being considered for COVID, either treatments and therapeutics or on the vaccine side. And right now we're tracking 315 different efforts for treatments, antivirals, antibodies, cell-based therapies, and 210 different vaccine efforts as well, 30 of which are in clinical testing, 6 in phase 3 clinical trials. But on the therapeutic front, what's really important to understand, we've made some really significant progress since March. We all saw and heard in April and May the outcomes of a master protocol trial through NIH that gave us answer around remdesivir. Mike and I were involved with actually getting some folks access to it on a compassionate basis. We had anecdotal information that remdesivir could be effective and saw the outcome of that through a platform trial to show that it really could help in terms of faster recovery for patients. Not too long after that, we saw dexamethasone as another potential therapeutic that can help reduce mortality. That came out of the recovery study in the UK. And so now we have an answer on remdesivir, an antiviral, dexamethasone, a corticoid steroid. Just recently saw FDA provide emergency use authorization for convalescent plasma, which has gone into over 60,000 patients through a Mayo Clinic initiative. And there are many more that are underway in terms of study. What's really promising right now, where there's a lot of focus, is monoclonal antibodies with the potential for it to be used both as a prophylaxis, potentially for frontline workers like healthcare workers, but also as a therapeutic for patients that are in the hospital. And that's being studied right now through an NIH network. So that's promising, that's hopeful. We're also seeing repurposed cancer medicines being investigated for COVID as well. Studies that are underway, Mike, through the Prostate Cancer Foundation that you're very familiar with, addressing TMPRSS2, which is one of the two ways that the virus really attaches itself to the cell. So looking at repurposed, potentially prostate cancer medicine that could be effective there. So that's what we're seeing on the therapeutic front, a number of master protocols beyond what I talked about that are studying a lot of different types of medications that could affect things like the cytokine storm, et cetera. And then, of course, where we see a lot of attention right now is on vaccines and the race to develop a COVID-19 vaccine, with 6 of them in phase 3 clinical trial, expectation that we might have a vaccine through emergency use authorization as early as November or December, even earlier if possible. So again, that could provide really definitive evidence and hope in terms of being able to provide, access to thousands, millions of people by the end of the year into the first quarter of next year to prevent COVID-19. So that's what we're seeing right now in terms of the landscape, Mike.
So Esther, if someone wanted to see what the more than 500 different protocols were, where do they go?
If you visit the milkeninstitute.org webpage, you can find our COVID-19 treatment and vaccine tracker, and you can download it in a usable way. It's all publicly available information.
And it's updated every night, which is...
We continue to update that daily. We have started that back in March, and we have continued to do so. And it's been incredibly helpful because we're keeping it, the information, the data very fresh.
So just a few areas I want to quickly touch on, Esther. One, Esther mentioned the repositioning of things that were successful in cancer. Now, why did we turn to this area? We turned to it because of the enormous progress in immunology, energizing your immune system. And as we've discussed in previous MRA events with Leverage Finance, there was really 3 reasons why you got cancer. One, you had inflammation in your body, a weakened immune system. 2, your immune system didn't recognize the cancer, it was disguised. Or 3, your immune system was turned off. And that was the work of Jim Allison on making sure your immune system was turned on. And we started working on that in prostate cancer beginning in 94-5. Did not prove successful, but began our focus in 07-08 with leadership from the MRA and melanoma, and that, along with many of the other 12 other approved treatments, has substantially reduced the death rate from melanoma. But many of these immunology treatments resulted in energizing your immune system. And so one of the first podcasts we did was with Jim Allison and Pam Sharma. We had a podcast number 50 that you can look at that Esther participated in that outline one of the areas, and these are ADT drugs that Esther was referring to, androgen deprivation therapy. They've been around for many decades. Many of them are in the public domain. And as Esther mentioned, by suppressing testosterone for a short period of time, 30 to 40 days, it suppresses the creation of TMPRSS2. And without TMPRSS2, it's quite possible that this virus will never make it to your lungs, or you'll have serious side effects. And we noticed this when I believe we only saw, out of 21,000 men that died, only 4 that were on ADT drugs in Italy. The other one is we've been looking at Comistat. The trial started at Yale. The ADT drugs are going on, and many of you have supported this effort in the VA systems throughout America. Comistat is a drug coming out of Japan that was used for pancreatitis. It also appears to make it extremely difficult for this virus to get into you or to get into your lungs. And so these trials and many others are going on. And one of the areas that Esther has been on point on is the view that we felt this was costing the United States $1 trillion a month. And that was a financial cost, but not the human cost, which we'll get into in a moment. And therefore, putting up money for manufacturing and clinical trials. So if it works, are we going to wait 6 months for someone to make a vaccine or to reproduce? So BARDA has put up probably $10 billion to accelerate manufacturing. And so if it doesn't work, it'll be thrown away. But if it works, hundreds of millions of doses. And working with the government, they have been aggressive in making this happen, whether it was the Oxford University AstraZeneca efforts, whether it's the Moderna efforts, whether it's the Johnson & Johnson. And to talk to you about the collaboration, which we're going to get to in a minute, that's occurred. J&J, Alex Gorski was one of the first podcasts I did in early April that you can read or listen to. And they were planning to put their vaccine, $1 billion investment by themselves and BARDA, into phase 1 in January when I interviewed them. It went into phase 1 in July. It's in phase 3 in September. And they're planning to provide this to the individuals in the United States and the world free of any profit from J&J. And so the speed and collaboration has been unheard of. And let's go to you, David, and talk for a few minutes about the potential collateral effects of COVID-19. We have children that didn't get to go to their high school graduation, didn't get to go to their college graduation. We have those that have taken a gap year. We have seen out of 15 million small businesses, 41% of every business owned or led by an African American shut down within 2 to 3 months. And so over 3 million small businesses were shut down. These were individuals who were employing small numbers of people, but still might have been important members in their community. And what is the effect going to be on young children, adults, and others when this is over? And David, I know one of the things you've been concerned about, and we have in our Center for Public Health, is the mental health issues that we're going to deal with in the next few years.
Yeah, Michael. Well, I think we've already actually seen some of those effects. So we saw early on studies in China that 20 to 25% of the kids there were suffering from depression and anxiety. That then moved into the US, where adult rates are now 50% of folks are experiencing symptoms of depression or anxiety. 8 times increased calls to the suicide prevention hotline. We started to see a lot of people coming to Google asking questions about depression, anxiety. We actually launched an anxiety screener to complement what we already had done around PTSD and depression, and of course a COVID screener, but allows people to self-identify their level of depression or anxiety and then get them into action. But when you think about the multiple effects, not only is it, am I depressed, when depression increases and the economy goes bad, we know that diseases of despair increase. That's suicide, depression, alcoholism, drug abuse. We also know that when you have kids out of school, I think it's only 30% of the kids in the LA Unified School District have even logged on once. So when you have kids out of school, not only are there going to be bigger gaps in education, but oftentimes school or the coach or the after-school program is the adult that identifies that a child may be exposed to adverse child events like substance abuse or physical abuse or sexual abuse. And they pull those kids out into safety. That's now not happening, right? So these kids are at home. They're at homes where houses are under increased stress. We know those houses are going to have increased rates of substance abuse themselves and alcoholism. And it's really, really setting up kids, those kids that we don't know or see or hear about because they're not on Zoom, that are having more trouble. So really important for us to make sure that we figure out how to allow us as a society to protect this most vulnerable group. So that's why we keep pushing mental health on YouTube. We know that our creators have a great way to get information out there and have helped them be able to more comfortably talk about mental health to decrease the stigma. Anxiety alone, typically people wait 7 to 9 years before they tell anyone, including their family, their primary care doctor, their psychiatrist, that they're suffering from obsessions and compulsions or OCD. 7 to 9 years before you share that with anyone. We want to decrease that time period so people feel comfortable talking about it. So we think that the mental health effects of this are already are, and are going to continue to be astronomical. And then you add on to that the sequelae of actually having COVID. We're learning more about the cardiovascular effects, the neurologic effects. So that's another wave of people. You may survive COVID, but you will have medical issues. And then there's the whole group of people that need routine care, mammographies, colonoscopies. They need their diabetes checked. They need regular physical exams, kids who need immunizations, that we've all been afraid to go into the doctor during this time period. So there's this entire gap of routine care. People are afraid and not coming in for routine care. So we really need to bring up the healthcare system back online so that people can get the routine care. And so we've really tried to focus on making sure we get people back into care, which clinics are open, how you get there, what's available from telemedicine, to make sure that the sequelae from COVID is not as large as it could be.
So I think, David, one of the things for our listeners or viewers at the MRI event today is to point out that even though telemedicine has increased 100-fold, 1,000-fold, what we saw was a very high percentage of mental health visits were canceled. So we're talking now about the long-term effects, and many of the people that support the MRA are among the world's leading philanthropists, but things that we want to focus on going forward. So we have seen opening patent libraries by biotech and pharma so people can manufacture products without royalties during this period of time, whether they're manufacturing in India or Pakistan or someplace else in the world. We've seen the sharing and the partnering of numerous companies. So when you look at antivirals, antibodies, or even vaccines, you will see that a few biotech or pharma firms are combined their efforts to bring these to market. And so, Esther, talk a little bit about the collaboration. I know Gates had assigned a person to interact with us. NIH had assigned a person. Let's talk a little bit about the collaboration, which I think both you and I would agree, and I'm sure David would, is unprecedented in the history of medical research.
We've seen a tremendous amount of collaboration with regard to COVID. I'm sure as you have participated in conversations with many people who are involved in various efforts, a lot of it is born out of the necessity of the times that we're in. We're in a global pandemic. Everyone's lives has been significantly disrupted. Companies' operations have been significantly disrupted. And everyone is looking to what can we do? What part can we play? And how can we roll up our sleeves in order to solve for this pandemic in real time? We've seen the NIH, of course, respond in a significant way with a partnership that Dr. Francis Collins established through ACTIVE. And it's a public-private partnership that brings together 17 to 18 large biopharmaceutical companies that are working with various agencies and U.S. government. The NIH, the FDA, BARDA are all part of this effort focused on accelerating therapeutics as well as vaccines. These companies have made their libraries available. They're leveraging the NIH clinical trial networks in order for us to get to an answer as quickly as possible. Some of the most promising therapies that we are tracking very closely, monoclonal antibodies, are being tested through this public-private partnership and this collaboration that's underway, that we expect some answers by the end of this fall. We've also seen the Gates Foundation step up in a significant way. The Gates Therapeutic Accelerator is an example of that. And they're partnering with MasterCard, the Wellcome Trust, and a number of other individual philanthropists in order to review in real time compounds that companies have also put forward that can be repurposed to address COVID, with a focus particularly on low to middle income countries, which I think is quite significant because we really need to solve for this pandemic everywhere, including in under-resourced or less resourced parts of the world, with therapies that can really get to the vast amounts of the population. We've been quite involved with also helping Gates partner on their clinical trial efforts with the government, with the VA, with NIH, and so forth. We've also seen non-governmental organizations like CEPI, the Coalition for Epidemic Preparedness Innovation, also step up in a significant way. They're partnering with individual philanthropists. They're partnering with sovereigns, with governments who are supporting their efforts, partnering with the U.S. government, with companies that have compounds, vaccine candidates that could be accelerated through clinical development, to helping them produce enough of their vaccine that can go through clinical trials, as well as manufacturing, funding advanced manufacturing. They're also part of a global effort with the WHO to secure enough advanced commitment of vaccine supplies for low to middle income countries. We're also seeing a tremendous amount of collaboration in NCATS, the National Center for Advancing Translational Sciences, that Faster Cures was instrumental in establishing a number of years ago. They're working very closely with the academic medical research community in order to review compounds that they submit to NCATS, to get assays in real time to understand how that compound has been used in other drugs, whether it has potential benefit for COVID, having all of that data provided to accelerate their efforts so they're not repeating that kind of analysis and efforts. So everywhere that we look, Mike, we see governments step up, we see private sector step up, we see philanthropy step up, and we see individuals, in fact, step up. And we have a lot of hope for what that means for us in the future as we think about other disease conditions. We realize now we don't have to work in silos. We can come together around rare diseases. We can come together around oncology. We can come together around Alzheimer's in a pre-competitive way to share data, make libraries available, collaborate on medical research that can accelerate these efforts going forward.
Well, David and Esther, I want to thank you for joining us today and just make a couple summaries. We will have a solution here for the COVID-19 pandemic. And the world has changed in collaboration and speed. The fact that a government is willing to put up money for manufacturing and production prior to knowing whether it works is kind of a new strategy on a massive scale. The MRA has made this commitment. They're going to make sure that their future growth and success, which has led to 13 different approvals by the FDA, is operating and is up and operating as fast as possible. And I would say to you that your investment in cancer research is playing a very important role in eventually controlling COVID-19. And one of the ways has been the ability to deal with the cytokine storm, because as we energize your immune system with these new drugs, etc., i.e. calling up the Navy and the Army and the Marines and the Coast Guard and the Air Force, they have had to find a way to control the cytokine storm in order for it to be effective for you, the patients. The amazing advancements of the MRA that research that data in many ways are helping us accelerate the day that COVID-19 is behind us. Thank you for joining us today. Esther, thank you. David, I want to thank you, and Google and Alphabet for everything you've done, not only for the US, but for the world in this area. And Esther, I've been amazed by your and your team's work. Thank you, and have a great day.
Thank you, Mike. Thanks, Esther.
Hey, Mike, thank you. Bye-bye.
LFFM has rallied every year to support the Melanoma Research Alliance and its wonderful and effective support of fighting melanoma. Melanoma is the deadliest form of skin cancer, and experts believe that 90% of all melanomas are caused by UV radiation from the sun and indoor tanning devices. Rates of melanoma are significantly rising, especially in younger people. In fact, cases of melanoma have tripled in the last 30 years, in contrast to rates for other common cancers which have steadily declined. We see most melanomas on our sun-exposed skin, but they also develop in other parts of our body that don't see the sun, including our eyes and under our fingernails. And unfortunately, melanoma spreads to other parts of our body easily and widely. That is what makes it so deadly and why we so appreciate your support. A deep felt thank you to all our sponsors and to you for joining us tonight and helping in the fight against melanoma.
During this period of such extraordinary disruption to our lives, we are so grateful to our sponsors for sticking with us. They understand that cancer is insidious, persistent, and could care less that we're enduring a global pandemic. As a survivor of stage 4 melanoma, I can say that without the hard work of everyone at the MRA, as well as the millions of dollars of sponsorships from you and the breakthroughs that have been developed since, I would not be here today. The research that MRA does doesn't just help develop breakthroughs for melanoma, it helps our understanding of cancer generally.
Fighting melanoma is really important to me because I've seen a lot of my family and friends go through that fight themselves. Melanoma is an incredibly common cancer. It's estimated that 1 in 50 Americans will receive a melanoma diagnosis over their lifetime. And at the same time, melanoma is very treatable if it's detected and addressed early on.
It's an honor to be involved with an organization that has helped so many people. And with your help, each year has surpassed the previous one, which means even more people are getting the help that they so need. I would like to thank all of you who have so generously helped the organization, and in particular, thank our gold sponsors, the Carlyle Group,
Davis Polk, Golub Capital, Guggenheim Partners, Hellman and Friedman, Howard and Nancy Marks, KKR, Milbank,
Morgan Stanley,
New Mountain, Sherman and Sterling, Silver Lake, Skadden Arps, T. Rowe Price, Thoma Bravo, Vista Equity, Weil Gottschall, White and Case,
melanoma for the last few years. And I think for our listeners and viewers today, I'd like to start with the concept that in many ways we're all going to be judged for what we did during this pandemic to meet the needs of our citizens and fellow workers, but also those most in need. Talk to us for a few minutes about what the response, your own response, your family's response, but Thoma Bravo's response to your own employees, to the thousands of employees of the companies that you've invested in and control, and how you saw this play out in society.
Thank you, Mike, and thanks so much for having me. I really, really appreciate it. Look, it's a very, very complicated time. And one of the first things that kind of came up and that I saw within our employees was this affects people very differently. And the key first thing that we did, and I'm really glad we did this, and I told the team, we will not judge anyone. No judgments. Because we had some colleagues that wanted to get back to traveling very quickly, that wanted to get back to the office, that wanted to pursue their careers. And for them, this wasn't too big of a risk for a whole host of reasons, personal reasons, experiences, etc. And we had other colleagues that thought that engaging in any way was such risky behavior, especially in the world that we live in where there's a lot of money involved for positive actions. And the other side could have said, well, you just don't want to get back to work. It's so interesting that one of the key things at the personal level, and we're all about culture at our firm, is having everyone not judge somebody else. That was the key. From the standpoint of society, you and I had a conversation about this, and that's one of the things that inspires me about your foundation, how it got started and why. And you get to some point in your life when you realize that if you're not doing something, nobody else is about a given problem or something that touches you personally. And with that, one of the things that we did at Thoma Bravo is given the fact that we're in software and technology, and our office is in San Francisco, we were one of the first to fund getting internet access and tablets in the hands of public school students for a whole host of reasons, not only the pandemic, but also how those students can learn in the future through summer programs, and so they're not lost in the system. That was really key, and that was pretty inspirational, especially for our younger colleagues that saw us immediately react to this. And from a business standpoint, what do we do with employees? It's just a very interesting thing because no crisis is the same. And of course, we had no idea that something like this could happen. And we needed to cut cost very quickly at our companies because our philosophy is in times of crisis, it is better to be overly conservative than overly optimistic. That's kind of rule one. And rule two is in times of crisis, you have to be very hands-on. So we realized, given that we did not know, could not project really any company, that it was appropriate to cut cost. But see, we didn't do it by laying off people because we thought in this environment, it was too unfair for employees to be looking for work elsewhere where nobody could take an interview. It wasn't like the financial crisis where talented people could go out with some training and go on and fulfill their careers. So we had to do things a bit differently. And all this is really still ongoing, and we're learning through it.
So Orlando, we're speaking to a number of people today from the financial community who, like you, have supported the Melanoma Research Alliance over the years. And before COVID-19 hit, we saw that more than 50% of people under 30 felt that maybe socialism or communism might be a better system. And we can imagine how they might be feeling today. We saw that only about a quarter of people in America under 30 felt their life was going to be better than their parents. And so there's a lot of challenges. And this year, the dual crisis of the COVID-19 pandemic and issues of injustice, inequality. How have you seen the potential for the financial community to better connect and better tell their story. You sit here that you've had more than 200 companies. Obviously, Thoma Bravo is one of the most successful money managers the world has ever seen. But we all are concerned in the financial community on whether the free enterprise system is truly meeting the needs of the people. And yourself, coming from Puerto Rico, I'm not sure that many of our viewers or listeners are aware that you came from Puerto Rico not to pursue a financial career, but came because you were a great tennis player initially. So how do you view the reactions as you see them this year, and whether we are meeting, or how the free enterprise system can do a better job meeting those needs?
Well, one of the things with the free enterprise system in the financial community and the private equity community that we're all part of, where we're not doing a very good job, even though the AIC does, and we're a member of it, and we're supportive of it, and we talk to senators, and our companies do, and we provide case studies. That's only in the infancy, or in the beginning stages of our industry really being able to explain what it does for the free enterprise system, and therefore for wealth creation and improvement in the quality of life. Okay, well, one of the things that has happened, and I'm involved in the Brown Economics Research Center, is every 100 years or so, some group of academics and politicians and come together, and they decide that the previous system, the neoclassical system, is not good anymore, and we need a different system because it may have created a whole host of problems. And one of the ways, and sure, there are some problems that exist that are not being solved by the current system, externalities related to the environment and other issues of inequality that will be addressed and should be addressed. But the fundamentals of our system are very clear, and our industry needs to do a better job of it. One of the key things that I really am into researching is in Venice in the 1300s. There was a group of merchants, of entrepreneurs, that decided that they could contribute in terms of moving merchandise for the feudal lords. And they would take a cut of the profits. If you moved the merchandise, you received a big cut of the profits, and if you didn't, you would have a loss. And they started creating a lot of wealth. And it just reminds you, doesn't it sound like private equity? Doesn't it sound like financial services, where if you move capital, where you do things, you can start creating wealth? Until they were becoming too wealthy and too powerful and being threatening to the incumbency, which was their own political system and their own feudal system. And they removed them. And Venice stopped progressing, and now it's a beautiful place to go. But it's not the free enterprise system that we live in. I think to your other point of your question, so one thing is really explaining what we do and what our industry is about, and how it increases the standards of living by moving capital quicker, by chasing innovation, by taking risk, by being entrepreneurs. 3 people in an office can do just great things in our system. But the other thing is leading by example. Knowing that when you get to a certain point, you're going to be watched very carefully. And what you do has a big influence in how so many other young people behave. That is an individual sense of responsibility.
So Orlando, companies that have benefited, and the world that you've been in software primarily, and other industries, cruise ships, airlines, hotels, have had, and restaurants have struggled. And so as we've looked at this, we have more and more people, and in a survey which we did recently of leading people in the financial, we now had more than 70% of them say we're going to have a K recovery. For some companies, the wind is to your back, and for some companies, the wind is blowing very strongly. So as you see financial markets, first, I know your partner, Carl Thoma, was both a partner for you and a mentor. but how did you choose going into the software industry and the areas of your firm has specialized in? And how do you see the recovery affecting the businesses that you've invested in? And how do you see if you're going to change your approach? You have a new fund of almost $25 billion that you've raised here. How has COVID-19 affected your thinking, your firm's thinking, the direction that you're headed? And obviously, in many ways, your companies are in the upward case slope since you really haven't specialized, particularly in bricks and mortar travel and et cetera. But what's your view and what's your firm's view of the more financial markets we're in today?
Well, look, I tell you the great two parts to that question. I appreciate you asking about that is, how did we get into this in the first place? And where do we think things are now? And what just happened here? Really, I got into it by first doing a lot of bad deals. I had I was given a lot of responsibility and authority at the beginning by Carl, and I did 3 bad deals back to back. And I almost was about to get fired. And he gave me another chance. Now, I was in the San Francisco office, so I had an affinity towards technology. This is right pre-dot-com bust. So my classmates from Stanford Business School were becoming millionaires working at a dot-com startup and things like that. So I wanted to understand that action. And obviously, from a venture approach, I did not. But I was given another chance, and I said, look, no more venture deals. I don't know that business. It's not for me. It's not for my type of personality, risk tolerant, what I believe in, what I think I could be good at. So given that values were so low, we started looking at software companies. And the pitch was simple. You can buy recurring revenues in software in the year 2000 cheaper than you could in almost any other recurring revenue category. Media, cable, outdoor advertising, you named it. And while the companies were not making any money at the time, it's not as different as it is from today. We thought that we could hire operators, and with 90% gross margins, we could have great cash flow businesses. But see, the thing was, in software that's very relevant today, I remember the first deal we did. It was a software company that sold to small mid-market distributors of tile, electrical equipment, all kinds of distributors. They have about 5,000 customers. And I remember my colleague and I telling Carl, why would anybody invest in a distributor that has 3% EBITDA margins, highly competitive businesses, when you can buy the software company that runs all their business, warehousing, logistics, customer entry, has recurring revenues, and has 90% gross margins? Why would anybody do that? The same thing in education. So why would people buy for-profit schools at 12 times EBITDA when you can buy the software company that's selling them intellectual property that's completely diversified? We did that as well. So the venture capital community at the time was saying, that's stupid because all these companies are old and they're going to go out of business. And that did not make sense to us. A lot of our private equity example peers were saying, well, tech is risky. We're not entering that game. And that also didn't make sense to us from these companies. So as we went along, we were able to build this business and continue specializing. When the pandemic happened, it was about the third shock that we have seen software endure. And the first 2 ones, the recurring revenue stood tall and did very well. The businesses were very resilient. There were a lot of hedge fund blogs out there saying software is going to get destroyed. This SaaS revenue is new. The recurring revenue is not as resilient as people think. People can turn it off very quickly. And this is going to be a problem. We were nervous, but that did not make sense to us either. When you're so embedded in your customers, software has become their business. You cannot transact, analyze information, communicate, market to your customers without these core pieces of technology. And guess what happened? That recurring revenue stream was really nearly untouched in the pandemic. Corporate customers paid their subscription software revenue, but they didn't pay rent. It was more stable than real estate. So where it's going, it's very interesting because there's something a lot deeper that's going on in the industry that partly explains the potential overvaluation of the whole space. For the first 30 years in software, the whole solutions that were being produced by these vendors were really targeted at improving the cost of materials, the cost of goods sold, improving that supply chain process. When SaaS and cloud computing really started, most of the solutions being provided by the new companies are to solve operational expense problems of businesses. These are 20 times as large, at least, as their cost of materials. That's where the expensive labor is. That's where the complicated processes are. So the industry is multiplying in size and at the same time becoming more embedded in the customer base. Now, as to companies that trade for 50 times revenue, those are very difficult to understand and stand behind. But we do not think that the current valuation environment is anywhere near what it was during the dot-com bubble.
So Orlando, in many ways, we've seen software companies go public this year. And as a private investor with the largest amount of funds you've ever raised, and maybe the largest fund ever raised in this area, how do you see yourself investing with the public market willing to pay substantial multiples today for recurring revenue and software?
That is very difficult. It's a difficult problem. Now, we've been there before. And a lot of the story that I said is the public markets realizing that and paying handsomely for it. There are two things, though, that have always remained the same in software since we started doing it 20 years ago. The first one is valuation inefficiency. This space is characterized by gross overvaluations when companies are beating their quarterly estimates on revenue. And when they miss, even when they miss by very little, since they don't have any fundamental earnings to support any value, they crash. We have bought many businesses at times where their peak market cap was 20 billion. We bought them for $1 billion. There was a company, the peak market cap was 17 billion. We bought it for $700 million. I'm not saying we bought those companies cheap, but I'm saying there was something wrong in the values of it. So that's one piece. And we're not an index buyer. So all we need to do is 3 to 4 significant deals a year to continue our pace in a universe of tens of thousands of companies that continue to multiply based on the new solutions and the new capital that goes into the business. But the second thing that has remained the same in software over all this time is operational inefficiency. When we started 20 years ago, the average EBITDA margin of a software company, publicly traded, was negative 5%. Today, the average EBITDA margin of a SaaS software company that's public, that's a $1 trillion market cap environment, is negative 3%. There has been no improvement in that over time, and therefore that provides an opportunity for private equity really to add shareholder value.
What do you tell your kids, Orlando, you do? So this year, we see the stock market going down 30 to 40% in a very short period of time. And then in another relatively short, though longer period of time, going to new highs. Do your children ask you, hey, Dad, what are you doing for a living and what's happening in these financial markets?
They do. Of course, they laugh at me. They don't take me seriously. They do all that kind of stuff. So they keep me really grounded. And how I explain it to them, what I do is we do two things. Now, I always say it's very difficult to be good at more than one or two things. Okay. What we do is we know how to identify software companies that are really innovative, that are the true innovators. We're good at seeing that and once again identifying it. And secondly, we're really good at running these companies in partnership with people. So a lot of my conversations that they hear me on the phone with a colleague or with a CEO is all about operations. That's where I spend most of my time, and so does our team, versus in the financial markets, doing more rapid transactions.
So Orlando, I just want to give you a quote that was a while ago. I would have rather played at Wimbledon than become a successful financier investor. Do you still feel that way today?
I definitely do. You know, I was in a meeting with these great potential LP of ours, and there were 3 people on the call, and towards the end, one of them said, "Can I ask you a personal question?" I said, "Yeah, this is great, go ahead." And they asked me exactly that, and it took me 1 second to answer. I said, "It's not even close. I would have rather," and I think he asked, would you rather have won Wimbledon? I'm like, I would have rather just stepped on the court in Wimbledon than do all this. Now that's hard. This is easy compared to that.
So Orlando, I want to thank you for your support of the MRA and its efforts. And the MRA has not only changed the course of history for people with melanoma, but more than 20 other cancers. And I often think about, had the MRA existed, maybe my father would still be alive. I know you responded substantially when the hurricane hit your home of Puerto Rico and the devastation that occurred. And I think, as you've told our listeners and viewers today, the importance of education and access to broadband, since we heard earlier today in a session with David Feinberg from Google that the majority of children in LA Unified have not even gone online to school, and we can all manage in the challenges we face in our society if all children don't have a chance of education or a chance at the American dream. When you go back to Puerto Rico today and you see your enormous success and what's occurred over the past few decades, what do you tell your friends or people you knew that never left Puerto Rico or never took that trip that you did to Brown and Stanford and to building one of the great firms in the history of the investment market? What's the interaction with those individuals?
You know, I interact with them a lot, and the interaction is, from a financial standpoint, I've been very lucky. I've been really blessed, and nothing has changed. Our friendship is exactly the same. We talk about the same things, and they're as casual as they were, which I really, really appreciate. I'm really proud that they like what I did. They don't see me as just leaving Puerto Rico. They have followed some of the things that Thoma Bravo has done, and they stay in touch in that way with me also. One of them, about a month ago, we were sitting down and said, "Why don't you write a book? This is great. What happened?" And I said, "Look, there were about 20 of us. One of us had to get somehow lucky in something. So the odds are also there." So you know, and after the hurricane in Puerto Rico, about a day and a half after, that was my personal moment in philanthropy, where I understood at that point for the first time that if I didn't do anything about it, nobody else was going to. And that's where your organization and this organization is inspiring to me, is when I understood it better, listening to the personal stories and how people got involved, and the dramatic research and outcomes that have been produced just because people did it. And I didn't think about philanthropy that way before. And the specific one was, My brother in Puerto Rico had befriended a reporter the day right after the hurricane, and that reporter was running through the island, calling him whenever there was a signal to let him know what communities were really in trouble and why. And he got this call late at night saying that there was a community right next to the place I grew up in. It's called Lattice, and I grew up in Mayagüez. That said that there was a shelter with 50 people that had 2 days supply of food and water. That was it for me. I knew that nobody was going to go there. I knew the central government of Puerto Rico was not going to go there. I knew it. I know the island really work. I really well. I know how things work. So we had the resources, and there was no nonprofit organization that I could call to try to help on that. So we just went. We told them, tell the reporter we'll be there tomorrow, and we were able to actually go and make it. And there were no problems with the roads. You can make it. It was difficult, but it was the need for somebody that can actually do something about it.
Orlando, thank you for the call to action. I think, and many of the leaders in leverage finance and have taken up that call to support the Melanoma Research Alliance. It's research, 18 countries, more than 100 different programs. And today, as we saw at the beginning, we have individuals involved with this program who are alive today and representing the enormous progress. And when I've seen the progress of the Melanoma Research Alliance, and you can just imagine if you had a pharmaceutical or biotech company that had 13 drugs approved, what that value would be. But we measure that value in human life. Thank you for your support. Thank you for your advice. And I'm going to turn it back over to our team at the MRA.
Thank you.
Everyone in the leveraged finance community should be proud of the industry's impact on the fight against melanoma. You might be interested to know that advances in melanoma research have created a ripple effect across oncology and have helped create new and viable options for not just melanoma, but lung, breast, kidney, and bladder cancer, just to name a few. So thank you all. And a special call out to our preferred sponsors. In a year in which so many worthy causes need attention, a huge thank you for your critical support.
Thank you for joining the 9th annual Leveraged Finance Fights Melanoma event. I became involved with the MRA 7 years ago to honor my father, who was an oncologist spent his career fighting melanoma and other cancers. Thank you to our advocate sponsors. Your gifts are critical in our fight against melanoma. Thank you to the Leveraged Finance Fights Melanoma community for coming together today and leading the fight against cancer.
Thank you for joining us for the 9th annual Leveraged Finance Fights Melanoma event. This concludes our program. We look forward to updating you soon on the 10th anniversary event in 2021.